So often here at Centennial Wealth Advisory, we get into conversations about Roth IRAs versus traditional IRAs. And a lot of times people, it's sort of surprising, they aren't super familiar with what a Roth IRA is and how it could potentially benefit them. And so that's one of the areas we spend a lot of time just sort of talking about taxes and how that plays a role. And I know, Art, you actually had a conversation recently that I overheard where you were talking to a client and sort of said, hey, we want you to pay more taxes this year. And I was just waiting for them to see their reaction. And they didn't hit you, which was good. But if you don't mind, share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you throw that comment out there and when you're speaking to taxes, because traditionally, we've all kind of been ingrained, hey, we understand we have to pay our fair share of taxes, but I want to pay any more. I want to pay, if I can squeak by and not have to pay much, it's a win. That's kind of what we've been ingrained to believe in there many years. And so the conversation you're talking about, John, is I was challenging a client, says, I want you to pay more taxes this year. I hope you pay more taxes. And there's more to it with that, right? If I just said that, somebody would be like, well, I don't want to talk to that guy, right? But think about it, many times people come into our office and they kind of brag that they didn't pay taxes. There's sweet spots, especially when you get on Social Security, where you can have a fairly decent income and actually pay no federal income tax, kind of depending on where that's coming from. So people come in and brag about that. Well, oftentimes really what you're doing is you're kicking the can to a bigger tax bracket down the road. And so it's not just, we can't look at taxes in a silo and just look at, oh, I didn't pay anything this year, because likely that could compound something in the future. So we say, I want you to pay more this year. What we're really doing is mapping on a plan for your future. And maybe it makes sense to pay more now, doing a Roth conversion, accelerating income, because you have something down the road, a potential property sale, a capital gain realization, a required minimum distribution coming. Maybe something is happening, and so we can't get trapped into thinking just about year in and year out when we're doing that tax preparation at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think it's so true. Like accountants, their responsibility is making sure that your taxes for the year are completed properly and the right information is entered into those forms. But that's where we challenge ourselves here at Centennial Wealth Advisory, and our tax planning team is to look at not just this year, not just the next 5, 10, what does the next 20, 30 years look like for you? And so recently was sitting down, she was a widow from Benzie County, and ultimately she was in a position where most of her retirement assets were in traditional IRA, and she thankfully had some after-tax money that she was using as well. And so we mapped out sort of what her income plan looked like for retirement. She was in pretty good shape with between Social Security and also had a pension from her deceased husband, and so she had this income stream set up, and she sort of looked at the traditional IRA and sort of said, well, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to need that money. It's nice to know that it's there, but I don't know if I'm going to need it. And so we started talking through things and ultimately found that really her number one goal with this money was to leave to her children. And so with that, just started having the conversation of, okay, well, if you want to try and maximize those dollars, and based on the tax position she was in, we sort of said, well, here's how we could start shifting some amount year by year from traditional IRA over to Roth IRA. Now, she would pay the tax today and then transition to Roth IRA, which would leave the money tax-free to her kids. And as we talked further about this, her children were in a pretty good financial position, and so their income was probably going to be in a higher tax bracket than it is for her. And so again, that objective of trying to keep as much money in the family's pocket versus paying Uncle Sam more, she was fully on board with that idea of, again, it wasn't just do it all at once or anything like that. It was an annual process of shifting money year in and year out from traditional over to Roth, and now building this sort of tax-free bucket of money.
Absolutely. If you're somebody sitting out there and you have retirement savings of any kind, no matter what the amount is, an IRA, after-tax Roth, and you're not having tax planning conversations, you are likely leaving money on the table. And that money, as John talked about in that case, could be in your pocket, your spouse's pocket, your family's pocket, and not Uncle Sam's because of improper planning ahead. Make sure you're doing your due diligence on this and helping yourself so you can plan to retire well.